Hello guys, and welcome back to the show. In today's video, we are going to look at how to use Docker to deploy a Flask application. Before we start, what is Docker? Now, Docker is a tool for running applications inside of an isolated environment. It is basically like virtual EMV. What do I mean by this? Basically, Docker helps us to create a world, and inside of the world, we have all the dependencies that we need to run an application inside of it. So if it runs on my machine and it works on my machine, it will work on every machine. I don't want to get too much into details of what makes up Docker, but we will make a simple Flask application using Docker, and hopefully through this process, we will learn what Docker is and how we can deploy a Flask application using Docker. Okay, so I've created a directory called Docker Flask, and as you can see, I've got nothing in there. If you have been following my tutorials, you know that I like to create a virtual environment and then install all the dependencies that I need in order to write my application. But today, like I said, we will be using Docker. So what I will do now is to create a file called app.py. So I will say touch app.py. Okay. Then I'll open this in Visual Studio Code. What I'm going to do now is to import Flask from Flask. So I'll say that from Flask import Flask, then I'll say app Flask, then I'll pass this the underscore name underscore, then I'll say def index, and this index, what it will basically do is to return hello. Then the next thing that I will do is that I'll say that if underscore name underscore is equal to underscore main underscore app.run debug is true, and I'll set the host to 0.0.0.0. Now let's try and see if we are able to run this application in the terminal. So I'll go to the terminal, then I'll do Python app.py, and as you can see, I get an error because I do not have Flask installed on my machine. In order for this to work, I need to be able to install Flask on my machine, okay? And we'll be using Docker in order to do this. So what I will do now is to create a file called DockerFile, like so. Now, before you can use Docker, you need to make sure that you have Docker installed on your machine. And you can check if you have Docker installed on your machine by using docker-v. I have Docker installed on my machine. If you do not have Docker installed on your Mac or on your computer, what you can do is to go on the Docker website and then download from Docker Hub and then do the installation on your machine. And once you've installed Docker on your machine, you can try this command again. And if you do get this, it means that you have finally got Docker installed on your machine. So we've created the Docker file, okay? And this Docker file will be a file that will let us talk to Docker. It will have inside of it some commands, and using that commands, we will be able to communicate with Docker. Now, the first thing that we are going to write in this Docker file is from, and then we need to provide this the base image. So what is an image? An image is basically a read-only template that contains a set of instructions for creating a container. I know that is confusing, so watch this. I'm saying that from, and the base image that I want is Python 3. What does this mean? On my local machine, I've got Python installed. So if I say Python, I have Python installed over here, okay? I've got Python 2.7 installed on my local machine. But in the world that I would like to create, I do not have Python installed on it, okay? I need to install Python before I can run this app.py file inside of Python. Because it's Python, I need a way to run Python, okay? So I'm telling DockerFile that Docker, I want you to give me Python 3 inside of this world. So I'm saying DockerFile, if I do not already have Python 3, could you please get me Python 3 and install Python 3 in the world that you are creating for me? Okay, so where is it getting this Python 3 from? Well, with Docker, we have something called Docker Hub. So Docker Hub is basically where we have most of the images stored. over here we've got Python, but you could also find Node, okay, the official Node image, base image. You could find MongoDB, you could find Nginx. So there are lots of images that you can find on the Docker Hub. But what I want is the Python image. So right now, if I say Docker images, okay, which is a command to see all the images that you have on your local machine, the images that I have are these 3 images. As you can see, I do not have Python image in there. But now I have an instruction inside of the Docker file saying that, listen, if I do not have a Python 3 image, what I want you to do is to get me a Python 3 image and install the Python 3 image inside of the world that I'm creating. So let me show you what happens when I build this. Okay, so basically I can say Docker build. I can give it a name called Python app. -t is a tag, and the tag is called Python app. Then I will say dot over here. Okay, and with this dot, basically I'm telling Docker that inside of my current directory, so if I even stop this and I do ls, inside of my current directory, you'll find something called DockerFile, and then Docker will use this DockerFile to build an image. Okay, it will use this to build an image. So if I say Docker Python app dot like so, what is basically happening is that it is pulling the Python 3 image from Docker Hub. So now I have pulled Python 3 from Docker Hub. Okay, so now if I do Docker images, as you can see, I have Python 3 image pulled, okay, and I've built an image, okay, based on this Docker file. I've built an image and I've called that image Python app. I hope this makes sense. Now I'm going to delete the Python app. So I'm going to do Docker RMI, then I'll give it the name of the Python app. And as you can see, I've removed the Python app, and now I do have just the Python image and the other 3 that were originally there. Okay, the next thing that I will do is that I will create a working directory. So I will say work there, and the working directory that I would like to create is called app. What this is basically telling Docker that inside of my image, I would like to create a directory called app. Let me show you what I am trying to say. So let me delete this initially, and let me do Docker build Python app dot. I'll do Docker images. I have the Python app image, and now what I will try to do is to go inside of the Python app image. I'll run the Python app image, and when I run the Python app image, I now get a running container. So a container is a running instance of an image, and the image is basically this source code over here. It's basically this thing over here. Okay, that is my image. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to run the image and get a container. Then I'll go into the container and see what is in there. Okay, so I'll say docker run -it. This is the name of the image. I'll say bash like so. Okay, now if I do ls, I am inside of the container, and as you can see, I have these directories in there. I do not have anything else but these directories. Okay, now what I'm going to do is to create a working directory, and the working directory that I would like to create, I'll call it /app, and now see what happens when I run the container. So I'll exit from here. Okay, I'll run this command again, but now let us try and see what we have in there. So I'll do docker run it Python app bash, and if I do ls, as you can see, I'm inside of the app, which is the directory that I created over here. Okay, so if I do cd ... and I do ls, as you can see, I now have a directory inside of the container called app. I hope this makes sense. Okay, so I have Python 3 installed in the world. I've created a directory called app. The next thing I'm going to do is to create an environment variable inside of the Docker file, and I'll name this environment variable Flask app, and I'll set the Flask app to app.py. The next thing that I will do is to install Flask in this environment, in this world that I've created. Okay, so the way that I will install Flask is basically by doing this. I will exit from here. I'll create a file called requirement.txt. So I'll do touch. Okay, and inside of this file, what I am going to do is to specify Flask in there. Okay, and the version of Flask that I want. So I will say that Flask, and I'll set Flask to Flask 1.1.2. Okay, that is the latest version of Flask. So what I will do now is that I want to copy this requirements.txt file. I want to copy this inside of the /app, inside of the app directory. Okay, so I will say that copy, and as you can see, it is asking me to provide the source and the destination, and the source is this requirement.txt. So I will say / because it is in this directory, and the name that I want is requirements.txt. So I'll paste this over here. So I want to copy this file, and I want to put this file inside of the /app. Okay, so one more time, let me show you. Docker build -t python app dot. So now if I do docker run bash like so, okay, as you can see, I've got requirements.txt file in here. And if I do cut requirement.txt, as you can see, it says Flask, and then I've got 1.1.2. I hope you understand this. I've just copied this requirement.txt file into this app directory. So now what I'm going to do is to install Flask inside of the world. Okay, and how I will do that is to use the run command. So I'll say run pip install -r. Okay, recursively I want you to install requirements.txt. Okay, so I want you to install this. So this will be installed inside of the app directory, and by running this, I will install Flask inside of the app directory. Okay, now that that has been done, the next thing that I will say is that I want to copy. And what I want to copy is basically, I want to copy the app.py file, or everything over here. I want to put it inside of the app. Okay, so I will say a copy dot to dot. What this will do is that it will copy the app.py file and the Docker file inside of the /app directory. The next thing that I will do is to say cmd. And what cmd will do is to run the Python application. So I'll say python app.py. Basically the command that I will use to run this file. Okay, and which is python app.py. So now let's see if I am able to run this application. Remember that when I do python app.py, I get an error. Okay, so now let's see if we are able to use Docker to run the Flask application. So I will do Docker images, and I will basically delete this image. So I'll do Docker ps-a, which is this container that I need to delete. So I'll say Docker rm. I want to delete this container. Then I want to delete the Python app image. Okay, I've deleted that. And now if I do Docker images, I do not have, the Python app there. Okay, I do not have that installed. So now what I'm going to do is to build the Docker app again. So I will say Docker build -t Python app dot like so. And as you can see, I've got Flask installed. So now if I say docker images, I now have this Python app. Now let me run this Docker image. And when I run the Docker image, I'll now get a Docker container. Okay, so I'll say Docker run. And what do I want to run? I want to run this. So I'll say this. But let's go on this endpoint and see if we actually see hello. Okay, I will come over here, then I'll paste this over here. And as you can see, nothing is working. It's not working. And the reason why it is not working is because we have this running inside of the container. Okay, we need to be able to connect the port on our local machine, so on your Mac, to the port running in the container. Now the port running in the container is port 5000. Okay, so what we are going to do is basically to stop this, I am going to remove this. So I'll say docker remove this container. Okay, and what I am now going to do is to connect my local machine, so my Mac, a port on my Mac to a port in the container, so that I will be able to see in the browser. And I can do that by saying docker run -p, okay, and the P stands for port. Okay, and the port that I want to run this thing on is that I want to connect port 80 on my Mac to port 5000 in the container, and then I'll provide it the image that I would like to run. So if I run this again and I go over here to this URL, it will not work. But as soon as I change this to port 80, it doesn't work. And the reason why it is not working is because inside of my Python application, I have not mapped, the index to any root. So I'll say at up the root, and let me call even this slash, and let me provide this the methods. And the methods is basically a get method. So now if I go to slash localhost 80, I should be able to see hello. So now that I have done this, I need to create a new image, which will basically be an image with the addition of this code. Okay, so I'll say docker ps-a, and what I'll do is to delete this again. So I'll say docker rm, I'll remove this container, docker images, and I will delete this image because I want to build a new image. Okay, so I'll say docker rmi and this image. Okay, and now what I will do is to run the docker build command again to create a new image. Once that has been created, what I will do is to say docker run this. If I go on localhost 80, I should now see hello, as you see over here. So this is how you set up a Flask application using Docker. But as you can see, if I make any changes over here, it does not reflect in the browser. The way that we are going to solve this is by telling Docker that Docker, whenever I make a change in my files, I want you to make that same changes in the container. So we will tell Docker that Docker, when I come over here and I say, hello, Chris, what I want you to do is to do the same thing in the container. And we will do that using something called volumes. Okay, so I will terminate this. I'll do docker ps-a, and I will delete this container. Okay, so I'll do docker rm. Okay, so instead of running the application just like this, I can tell Docker that whenever I make changes in my files, I want you to do the same thing in the container. And we can use that using Docker volumes. So I will have another flag over here called -v. And what -v will basically say is that I want to map my current working directory, okay, my current working directory. So I will say pwd. Okay, I want to map my current working directory. So let me just even stop this. My current working directory is basically this Docker Flask. Okay, so that is my current working directory. So what I'm going to say is that I'm going to run this. Okay, and I will say that I want you to map my current working directory to the container. Okay, so I want you to map this to /app because that is my working directory. Okay, so I'm saying that I want you to map everything in here. So everything in here in my current working directory, I want you to map that to /app. Okay, let me get rid of this and I'll hit enter. And as you can see, it is working. Okay, now if I go over here, I see hello Chris. If I change something like hello Chris, hey, and I refresh, I get hello Chris, hey. This is how you connect your container to your working directory. And there's one more thing that I would like to do inside of my DockerFile. As you can see, the Flask application is running in production mode. If I come over here, it is using production mode. I want to change this to development mode. And I can do that by basically saying inside of the DockerFile that I want to create an environment variable that I'll call Flask _ env, and I'll set that to development. Like so. So basically what I've done is that I've set the Flask env to development. So now I'll create a new image, I'll run the image, and we should see that it has changed to development. So I'll do docker ps -a. I will delete all these containers. So I'll say docker rm. I want to remove all these containers. So I'll use the docker ps -aq, which will delete all of them. I'll do docker images and I'll delete this Python app. So I'll say docker rmi and I'll delete this image. The next thing I'll do is to build this image one more time. And now I will run the image again to get a container. So I will say docker run like so. And as you can see, now the environment is development and everything still works fine. In the last video tutorial, we saw how to Dockerize a Flask application. In this video, we will look at how to also Dockerize a React application and then make a fetch request from the React front end to the Flask backend. We'll be doing this using Docker Compose. Let's get started. So in the last video, we created a Docker file, an app.py file, and a requirements.txt file. We need to do a bit of cleanup before we can start. So inside of this directory, what I'm going to do is to create another directory that I'll call server. So I'll say mkdir server. Now that I have the server created, what I'm going to do is to move these 3 files into the server directory. So what I'll do is to copy all these 3 and then move them to the server. So if I do ls, I only have server. Okay, so now let's cd into server and see if we can still run the app.py file. Now, if I do docker images, I need to build my image. So I'll say docker build -t, I'll call it Python app, and I'll say dot. Okay, now that everything has been built, what I'll do is to run the application. So I'll say docker run -p Python app, like so, and I'll go to localhost 80 just to check that everything is working before I create the React app and then Dockerize the React app. So we know that the Flask app is still working. Now let's create the React application. I'll stop the server. I'll go back to the root of the application, so into Docker Flask. Then I'll create a new directory which I'll call client. So I'll say mkdir client, like so. Then I will cd into client. And the next thing that I'm going to do is to create the React app. So I'll come to create React app. Then I'll copy this npx create React app, my app. I'll go into the terminal and I'll paste this here. Then I'll hit enter like so. This should create a React app named my app. Okay, so we have everything completed. So what I'll do is to open this in Visual Studio Code as well. So I'll say code dot. The first thing I'll do is to remove this, and then I will create inside of the root of the React application a file called DockerFile. So I'll cd into my app, and I'll say touch DockerFile. Inside of this DockerFile, the first thing that I will do is to get a Node.js image. So I'll say from Node, I'll go with 14 and then slim. The next thing I'll do is to create a working directory. I'm not going to explain into details what these steps are because we already covered that in the last tutorial. So I'll create a working directory. Then what I'll do is to copy the package.json file into this directory. So I'll say copy dot, because it is in this directory, I want to copy the package.json to the working directory. Okay. All the commands that come after work there will be inside of this app directory. Okay, I'll do the same thing for the yarn lock file. So I'll say copy.yarn.lock, and then I'll run npm install to install all the packages inside of the package.json. So I'll say npm install. The next thing that I'll do is to copy everything that I have in here. Okay, I'll copy everything inside of the app directory. So I'll say copy dot to dot, and then I'll expose port 3000. So I'll say expose 3000, and 3000 will be the port in the container. When I run the image, I'll get a container, and the container will have a port 3000, which is the port that I can connect with to communicate with the React application. And then I can say cmd npm start. The last thing I'll do is to come over here, and then for now, just say h1, it works. Okay. And then I'll go ahead and build an image of this Docker file. So I'll go to the terminal, and I'll say docker build, I'll give it -t react app dot. So now that this has completed, the next thing I'm going to do is to say docker images, and as you can see, we have the React app image. So now I will say docker run, I will specify the port, and I'll say I want to map port 3000 to 3000, and then the name of the image. So I'll hit enter. This should now start the development server. I'll go on localhost 3000, and as you can see, it says it works. So we now know how to Dockerize a React application. Now let us connect the Flask backend to the React frontend. We will do this by using something called Docker Compose. Now the question is, what is Docker Compose? Docker Compose is an orchestration tool. It is used to manage multiple containers within an application. Let us now see how we can use Docker Compose to manage the client, which is the React application, and the server, which is the Flask application. I will cd into the root of my application, and over here, what I will do is to create a file called dockercompose.yaml. So I will say touch docker-compose.yml, like so. I'll open this in Visual Studio Code. Inside of this Docker Compose file, what I will do is to state the version of Docker Compose that I want. Okay, so I'll say version, and the version that I want is the version 3.9. So I'll say 3.9, like so. The next thing that I will do is to state the services that I want. Now, services are basically the containers that I would like to manage. Okay, And in this application, I've got two services. These are React app and then the Python app. Okay, so what I will do is to say services. I could simply say that one of my service is the image, and I could specify the Python image, and that is it. But that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to build the Docker file from this server directory. So I will say build, and I will build from /server, which is this directory, okay? Because this directory contains the Docker file, okay? So I will say server, and then I'll specify the port. We are using port 80 on our local host to connect to port 5000 in the container, okay? So I will say ports, and this is an array, so I'll say port 80 to port 5000. Then I'll specify the volumes, and as we saw in the last tutorial, with volumes, whenever we make changes in our file system, the changes happens inside of the container. So I will say volumes, and the volume will basically be .server. I want to map server to /app, okay? So I will say this / and then app. The next thing I'm going to do is to specify an environment variable. An environment variable that I want is environment. It's Flask env, and I want to set this to development. So I will say development. I think I forgot to specify over here that the services that I want is a server. So I will, and this can be any name that you want, okay? I just want to name my server. So I'll say server over here, and then I'll move this one space up like so. The next service that I want is the web service, which is for the React application. So I will say web, and what I want to do is that I want you to build from my app, okay? Because inside of my app, I've got the Docker file. So I will say that build, and the build is ./client /my app. The port is basically port 3000, which is my host to port 3000 inside of the container. For volumes, I'll specify that I want my client. So basically this path, if I go to the Docker file, I want that to be mapped to this one, okay? So I'll copy this and I'll paste that over here like so. And then I will say that this web application over here will depend on a server, just so Docker Compose will know how to manage the starting of the applications. So I will say that depends, and this depends on server, okay? So this server over here. And that is it. I've basically used Docker Compose to manage two containers. Now, how do we create a container from these images? Well, we can use the Docker Compose app command to run everything in here. So I'll go to the terminal, I'll do Docker, then I will delete this image, I'll force delete this, then I'll also delete the React app. But before I run Docker Compose, what I'm going to do is to let the Flask application return a JSON object that I can then use in the front end. So I'll go to the app.py file, and instead of saying, hey Chris, hey, what I'm going to say is that I want to return an object which has a key called channel, and the value is called this show, and another one called tutorial, which has a value called React, Flask, and Docker, like so. Now I'll go into the React application and create a component directory called components. Then I'll create another directory over here that I'll call channel. Then I'll create a file called channel.js. Inside of channel.js, what I'm going to say is that import React. Then I'll say export. And I'm going to say, this is a function that for now returns a div which has h1 and another h1. What I'm planning to do is to pass a prop to this component. I'll call the prop data, and then I can say data.channel. Then I'll say data.tutorial. The next thing I'll do is to go into my app.js file. I'll import useState and useEffect from React. Then I'll import my channel component from this channel file, like so. Then I'll create an initial state. So I'll say const initial state, and then set state, which is use state like so. Then I'll pass it an empty array. The next thing I'm going to do is to say use effect fetch from a URL. So I'll say const URL. So I'll pass a URL here. Dot then response. If the response is successful, so if this is 200, what I want you to do is to return the response.json. So I'll say return like so. And then I want the data. So I'll say dot then the data will be set state. Then I'll pass it the data like so. The last thing I'm going to do is to pass this component over here. So I'll say channel. Then I'll pass the data as a prop. And that will be the initial state. Like so. And as you saw, I am extracting the data from the prop object and then using it in this component here. So now what I need to do is to go to the server, change this to /API because I'm basically using it as an API, and then run the application. For now, let me make this a string, okay? We don't care about the URL for now. Let me make this a string and let's see if it works. So I will go to the terminal, and now instead of this command, what I will do is to say docker compose and then app like so. So basically this is handling everything for us. It is spinning up the React container and the Flask server. So we now have the React application running. So what I'm going to do is to go to the browser and then hit enter. But as you can see, nothing is working, okay? I'm not able to make the request to the backend. Someone might say that this is because I am using an empty URL. Fair enough, I am using an empty URL. So what I would do is to go back to the terminal and then copy this. And then I'll go to the React application, then I'll say this, but instead I'll use 80, like so. So if I copy this, go to the browser and then paste this here, then I do /API, I get the show, React, Flask, and Docker. Okay, so I'll go to the React application and say API. Now, if I check the browser, as you can see, I am getting a course error. But as you can see, I'm getting a course error. So how do we resolve this? And how do we make our React container talk to our Flask backend container? Well, we can do this by setting a proxy inside of our application. So let's try and set a proxy inside of the React application. So I'll go into the package.json, then I'll say proxy, and I'll set the proxy to localhost port 80, and I'll paste this here like so. Then I say /API. This should work, but it's not working. And the reason why it is not working is because inside of the package.json, we have 0.0.0.0. We need to change this to the name of the service, in this case server. So I'll copy server, I'll go to package.json, and then I'll paste this over here like so. So now if I go to the browser, I have this. So this is how we connect a React front end to a Flask back end using Docker. So a summary of what we did today: we created a client using React, then we created a Docker compose.yaml file, we specified the services, which in our case was the Flask application and the React client application. We named the Flask server, and we named the React application web. Then in our package.json file, we created a proxy and set the proxy to HTTP. Instead of localhost, we changed it to the name of the server, and then we changed the port from 80 to 5000. This could be 80 if you want to, but I changed it to 5000. I hope this makes sense. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video tutorial.